Good afternoon and welcome to today's video. This is part 2 of the video where we resprayed the centre console, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at also spraying the slightly scuffed grey parts of the dashboard, excluding the instrument binnacle. Now what I first did was to remove the centre console, and to do that you've got 4 screws holding the console in, and then lightly pull it from the bottom and it should pop off. If you have an aftermarket head unit like the one I've got here, you'll need to remove that from the centre console separately. But if you have the original Nissan radio cassette or CD player, that will actually be screwed into the panel behind the console itself, or the cover centre console piece itself. Now you need to remove your cigar lighter, which takes a little bit of work, but it does sort of just prise and pop out of the original fascia. And you'll also need to remove any blanking panels and the headlights aim switch as you see fit. What you can also take the time to do is just give the heater controls a bit of a clean. The next thing that you want to do is to remove the instrument binnacle. That is held on by 2 screws which are located either side of the steering wheel. Now the binnacle itself actually has a separate removable top piece, so you can remove that top piece if you wanted to make it easier to spray the binnacle itself. In this instance I decided to leave the binnacle grey because it provides a nice contrast between the 2 colours that I used. The instrument cluster is held in on facelift and coil pack models with 3 screws and a single multi-plug connector to the rear. The next job is to mask everything off. Now for this I just used standard masking tape and newspaper, and I also invested in an absolutely massive dust sheet which I covered the entire interior with at the front to contain any sort of overspray particles that may sort of come up whilst I'm spraying. Now the plastic dust sheet is reusable, so it is worth folding it back up and using it again for the future. What I also did as well, and something I would probably not recommend, is I popped out both the face vents on the dash, not the centre vents but the side vents. There are 2 little plastic retainers for those that the vent actually sits in. I've lost one on the driver's side, so my driver's side vent is not sitting correctly. So the next scrapyard trip I take, I'm going to grab another of those little plastic locating lugs. If I was to do this job again, I would not remove the face vents. I would meticulously cover them with masking tape. Now one thing I also did, using the standard spray method, was I accidentally created a bit of overspill, or a little bit of runoff. So using a bit of 800 grade and 1500 grade wet and dry, wet in this case, I rubbed down the area and managed to get an effect or a finish that wasn't actually too bad. One thing you might want to do as well is to ensure that you do this either in spring, on a hot spring day, or in the summer. You want the interior to be as hot as possible, because the paint just seems to go on a lot better. In between each coat I did use the hairdryer just to warm the surface and also sort of allow the paint to flash off a bit quicker. You can see here the area of overspray I had, or sorry, not overspray, the area of excessive spray and runoff that I had, which I'm just going over here. At some point in the future I may want to go over that again, because there is a noticeable difference in the finish. Obviously before starting the work you want to prepare the surface as well. I used 800 grade wet and dry and prepped the entire surface, removing the existing coat, which wasn't exactly on there very thick, to be honest with you. The coat and coverage that's on there now is much thicker. The finish is a bit tricky to get absolutely 100% right, mainly because I'm not a professional, and also because the dash itself has got a sort of almost a stippled finish on it from the factory. If I was to do this job again, I would probably invest a bit more time and actually remove the dashboard itself. The dashboard removal does require the removal of the steering wheel. I've tried to remove a dashboard in a Micra without removing the steering wheel, and you end up having to bend the dash. To be honest with you, this was in a scrapyard, so I wasn't too concerned. But the dash was fine, but it did bend alarmingly. So removal of the steering wheel is a must. Now, colours that I used, the undercoat was standard grey plastic primer. The top coat, which I'm doing here, is a rather nice Ford Tonic Blue Metallic. I'm not sure if that's a newer Ford colour, but I think it might be a colour that you see a lot of Mark II Focuses in. Quite a pleasant colour and quite a light shade, which contrasted well with the multicoloured seat upholstery and also the green dials that I had from that I've got from an SI. It also worked well with the centre console that I'd sprayed up in Ford Aqua Jade Metallic, producing, in my view, quite an overall pleasing effect. The dust sheet really comes into its own, to be honest with you, because you do get a lot of paint particles floating about, and those sort of tend to settle on the dust sheet, which is exactly what I wanted it for. I also found in retrospect it was easier to spray outside of the car in, but obviously make sure you've got the windows open so you've got plenty of ventilation. The lacquer top coat was applied in the standard way, and between the top coat and the clear coat I actually left the car for about an hour or so, went and had some lunch, so that is actually a good point for you to take a break between the top coat and the clear coat, so you can actually allow the top coat to harden. If I had more time, I probably would have left a lot longer between coats and let everything sort of dry off naturally, rather than accelerating the process using the hairdryer. The other thing that I noted as well was if you get overspray onto one of the other trim panels and the paint is still wet, baby wipes are a fantastic thing to have on standby. The baby wipes do sort of remove, with a little bit of scrubbing, the actual paint whilst it is still in that non-dry state, in other words whilst it's still wet. If, like I have, you've got overspray post-process, a razor blade or a standing knife blade just lightly scraping the paint off will improve the situation. Refitting. So this is the centre console. I actually had to dismantle the cigar lighter by removing the outer plastic shroud to get it into the console. The metal around the metal casing of the actual cigar lighter was a little bit too tight for the plastic ring that goes around it. So if you try to put the plastic ring in with the cigar lighter, it is almost impossible to do, even though it came out as a complete unit. So what I did was I prized off there's a couple of sort of locating tabs that you can sort of pop out with a flat blade screwdriver, and I managed to sort of prise those free, and then sort of popped the plastic collar off of the cigar lighter. If you obviously make sure you got the locating points lined up, you can then just sort of quite easily push the whole thing back in, and it really sort of goes in quite easily. The next step is to wire everything back up, so just basically plug all your connectors back in. Also, if you've got the older centre console like I've got here, you want to reattach the oddments tray. Newer consoles have actually got that moulded in, even though they've still got the screws on the back. So if you look at this one here that I'm bringing up here, you can actually see you've still got all of those screw holes on the back. There's 3 screw holes in total, but on the newer ones they've actually moulded the entire tray into the console itself, which is an interesting step, but I guess it may make for a cheaper mould if you've got one separate piece, one whole piece rather than two separate pieces. And this one here was manufactured in October of 2000. So the centre console goes back on. There's a couple of lugs locating points on the top, so you want to sort of put it in, basically sort of locate it at the top and then let it arch its way in sort of at the bottom. Make sure that you've got everything plugged in first, so radio, height adjuster, cigar lighter, etc. And here's the final result. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the finish. The colours contrast well with the seat fabric and also with that sort of SI cluster that I've got there. There is a little bit of overspray. In some areas the finish is not perfect, so if I was going to do this again, a couple of takeaway points is spend a bit more time on the initial prep, so the initial rubbing down, and also don't pop out those side vents. They're a pain to get back in. I managed to find if you rotate them sort of 90 degrees and then they do sort of go in a little bit easier, but they are an absolute pain to get in. But I'd say on the whole the finish is a lot nicer than the original sort of scuffed finish that I had, so I'm quite pleased with how this went. If you have found this video interesting, you can hit the like button and also consider subscribing for more upcoming fascinating hobbies. Thank you for watching.